Hi everyone. Today we're going to be learning about the old times, and specifically in the old times, the Men's Summer Olympic Marathon of 1904. This marathon started and ended at the Olympic Stadium in St. Louis with the length of 24.85 miles. Now, 24.85 miles is not the distance of a standard marathon, but this was the olden times, and so they weren't doing stuff by the book. They said they could do whatever they want. So to start the race, the runners ran around the stadium track 5 times, which again doesn't really make sense because they could just make up the distance. So I don't know why they were trying to add that extra distance by having them just run in a circle 5 times, but whatever. Again, it was the olden times. You could say that 24.85 translates to 40 kilometers, which would be a nice even number, but they just kind of that up too because that would only come to 39.99 kilometers. And so, I don't know, man, if you're going to make them run around the track 5 times, you could just, back up the finish line 30 feet and make it an even 40, but, whatever. Anyway, they probably hadn't standardized it yet because it was only the third marathon ever, and so the first ever one was 8 years before in 1896. And, as a little tidbit, factual information, because this will be the last time you ever learn about marathons, because they're boring. The first female Olympic marathon was in 1984, because before that, people were under the impression that women would die if they ran that far. So they were like, for your health, ladies. Doesn't make sense to me. Anyway, only the third ever, so they don't know how to do anything. So they start the marathon at 3 p.m. Now, in the new times, they start marathons early so it doesn't get too hot. But 3 p.m., it'd be good. It was only like 90 degrees because it's the Summer Olympics. So, Anyway, these less than ideal conditions lead us to the first place finisher, Fred Lors. So Lors ran about 9 miles before, I assume making a decision it was too hot because it was 90 degrees. And then he just quit the race. And so after quitting, he hitched a ride back in a car back to the stadium. And after waving from the car to the other runners and spectators for 10 miles, the car just broke down, because it was the old times. So at this point, the only logical thing to do would just, be to keep running and pretend you didn't just ride in a car for 10 miles, which is exactly what he did. So, he finishes the race. Everyone's like, holy shit, this guy just fucking won the marathon, third ever. He, took a picture with President Theodore Roosevelt's daughter, Alice, who was like, hey, congratulations. And he was like, thanks, Alice. So he was actually about to be awarded the gold when everyone was like, hey, aren't you that guy that was waving at us from that car? And he was like, haha, pranked. But apparently the Amateur Athletics Union can't take a joke, can't handle a prank, and they banned him from participating in marathons for a year. And so he was like, fine. And he was like, whatever. And the man who gave up running an Olympic marathon after just 9 miles somehow was the legitimate winner the next year of the Boston Marathon in 1905. And so after this Boston Marathon win, he was asked by a reporter how it felt to win after his ban, and he was like, hey, it's cool, but, he's worried about how a narrator would segue this topic into the next for their respective video. And the reporter was like, what if they talked about the actual winner of the Olympic race in 1904, Thomas Hicks? So Thomas Hicks made it about 15 miles before he was so exhausted that he couldn't continue any longer. And this is when his trainers stepped in. And if you're trying to be a good Olympic trainer, take notes right now because this is important. When he tried to just lay on the ground because he was so exhausted, they physically restrained him, so he wasn't able to do that. But here's the thing. Restraining an athlete isn't all that's necessary to be the best trainer. Sometimes bartending is also a necessary skill. They gave him a mixed drink composed of strychnine and brandy. And for those of you who are forgetting what strychnine is, it's rat poison. And so after hallucinating his way through the next bit of this race, fueled by alcohol and poison, He went from like barely able to walk to like unable to walk. And as you probably guessed based off the professionalism of his team he had supporting him, they just kind of like fucking held him in the air until the end of the race, where he kind of just shuffled his feet in the air as if he was still running. And, like, I don't know, like a quick side note, like I would have guessed he had enough strychnine in his system that he genuinely believed he was still running when they were carrying him, but, Anyway, after just kind of like laying on the track after he won the race, he had to be carried away off the track. And apparently, several doses of strychnine aren't ideal for being alive, so he was immediately given medical attention, for which, he likely would have died without. So, that's important. Good for him. Good job, Hicks. And so here's the thing. As another side note, I feel like people in the old times were like way more chill with crazy substances than we are now. So it's like, how is the final decision to give him like strychnine? Like, I think meth was used like as a dietary supplement, and I know there was cocaine in the soda. So like, why, when the substance was needed to give someone insane amounts of energy, they were like, oh yeah, duh, rat poison and hard liquor. That's a no-brainer. But anyway, as I said before, this was the olden times. And Hicks, as the first place winner, the only thing that he lost was 8 pounds over the course of the race. Anyway, so those two guys, Hicks and Lors, they were pretty interesting. The second and third guys, they're like not as interesting. Like the second guy was a French immigrant who could have been running for France, and he should have been, but they like fucked up his paperwork so bad he was like, hey, yeah, sorry, you're running for America. And the third guy, like, even less interesting, but I guess he died in a place where I assume they invented Worcestershire sauce. So that's cool. But, remember that guy, Frank Lors? Wait, that's not his name. Fred Lors? He was the guy that got picked up by the car. Anyway, there were a lot of other cars, and many of them were carrying athletics officials that were monitoring the race. And so, cars were a new concept on account of it being the old times, as I've said before. So people didn't know that if you drive your car on a hot, dry dirt road, it makes significant clouds of dust. And even though they hadn't figured that out yet, the runners figured out pretty quickly that the dust created from the cars is not good to be breathing when running a marathon. They found participant William Garcia laying in the road who had severe internal injuries due to all the dirt that he was putting in his lungs instead of the normal air. Garcia was not the only person having trouble with his organs, which leads us to one of the most interesting people in this race, Cuban competitor Andorin Carvajal. Carvajal, who was a postman, after losing all of his money in New Orleans, hitchhiked to St. Louis and arrived just before the race. Whether it be the timing of his arrival or the fact that he had just lost all his money, he only had his street clothes to run the race in. Ever the innovator, Carvajal just cut the legs off his pants and was like, hey, yeah, this is fine, and then he started running. Here's the thing, though. Because of the reason I stated previously about, him like hitchhiking and losing all his money, he hadn't eaten anything in 40 hours and was trying to run a marathon. And he figured this out pretty quick. Like, it's the old times, but they weren't, stupid. Anyway, so instead of trying to continue running, he stopped at an apple orchard and, just stole some apples. And, staying on theme with the chaotic nature of this story, it seemed only right that these apples were just rotten. After having stomach cramps that were so severe that they caused him to have to lay down and take a nap in the middle of the race, he got back up and kept running. Alright, and here's the thing. As a side note, I didn't see anything when I was learning about this that said he shit his pants after he ate all those apples, but how else are you going to get relief? I feel like they would have said something if he'd have thrown up, because it's a little bit more palatable. So it's how do those stomach cramps go away? I think he took a shit in the apple orchard. Anyway, to recap, after losing all of his money in a neighboring state, hitchhiking to the Olympic event, arriving just before the event, cutting the legs off his long pants, stopping to eat apples to remedy his 40-hour hunger, having those apples be rotten, getting sick, taking a nap in the middle of the race, he got back up and kept running and finished 4th place. 4th place. So look, while there are abundance of errors happening here, if we think about it, there's something that could have been a pretty effective damage control in this situation. And that would be water. Remember Thomas Hicks and how he lost like 8 pounds over the course of the race? Well, some of that was probably due to the insane effort needed to simultaneously run a marathon and also not be poisoned at the same time. A lot of that weight was lost due to dehydration. So there's the question, why did competitors not have enough water to run like 25 miles? And the answer is, there was only one water station in this entire marathon at mile 11. James Sullivan, the chief organizer of the Olympics, was supposed to be responsible for those water stations. And when people were like, yo, James, what the why didn't you give those people water? They're running a marathon. His only apparent reasoning was that he was doing research on purposeful dehydration. So, I mean, okay, look. I've talked a lot about how these were the old times and how in the old times knowledge was, hard to come by. But if James Sullivan doesn't know what happens when people don't drink water, I would question his qualifications to be chief organizer of the Olympics. So look, if water had been available, there would probably have been fewer runners succumbing to the heat and the dust. And this race would probably not have the lowest competitor to finisher ratio in Olympic history, with 32 competitors and just 14 finishers. Of these 14 finishers, 3 of them were from countries that had never competed in the Olympics before. The competitor from Cuba we've already talked about, and that was Carvajal, the guy who shit himself in an apple orchard and then placed 4th. But the next 2 were from South Africa. And these guys were actually the first black African athletes to compete in the Olympics. These 2 Tswana tribesmen named Len Tao and Jan Mashiani not only both competed, but also both finished the marathon. Mashiani finished 12th, while Tao finished 9th. And here's the thing. A lot of people were disappointed in Tao placing 9th because he was like a really strong runner, and they feel like he would have done better if he didn't get chased a mile off the track by a pack of aggressive dogs in the middle of the marathon. So I think when you look at this event, all things considered, the cheating, the, poison, the dogs, the sleeping in an apple orchard, the purposeful dehydration, that's questionable. There's a lot of mystery why that guy didn't just give the competitors water. I don't really get it. But look, I've been talking very negatively about the olden times and how stupid people were. But here's one important point that I want to make about the olden times and all these people. Everyone that I've talked about is dead, so, they can't even be mad about it, So, it's not a big deal, what are they going to do to me? They couldn't do anything. They're dead.